Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about Pluribus Season 1 Episode 9. It's called La Chica o el Mundo. So spoilers for the episode. It is the season finale and apologies if I butchered the pronunciation of the Spanish. I did check what that meant. And to be fair, like Chica I was pretty sure on. Mundo I wasn't positive, but it's the girl or the world, which does make sense in the context of the episode. And obviously the language barrier is a big part of this episode as well, so it makes sense why it's in Spanish. I like this episode a lot. In fact, I don't know if it's my favorite episode. It may be my favorite episode, but it's certainly the funniest episode of the season. This was hilarious, and a lot of it had purpose. A lot of it advanced things and challenged me once again to think about where I stood in certain conflicts, particularly between Carol and Minos, where I thought it did a really good job of like making me kind of like waver between whose side I was on a little bit more, depending on which part of the story we were at. And I think the way it's balancing that throughout the story as a whole, but certainly in this episode, was really, I thought, quite impressive. But to start off with the cold open in which one of the 12, the girl from the village, it's the day where she's turning. It's the day where they've concocted how to turn her into part of the collective, and they bring her this canister, and we see that she's waiting, she's nervous, she's sweeping the same spot over and over, everyone's happy, and they're even singing as they're coming up with the canister. It's just a vapor she has to breathe in, pretty much. But you get quickly that this is her day, this is her becoming part of the collective, to show that they have achieved this. They've been able to do this with her consent, presumably to get her stem cells, and sure enough, it happens, and we go through the process where they're ready for her to kind of collapse, which seems to happen whenever this process goes through. But when she gets up, and she's part of the collective, one, it's interesting to watch her performance, because she goes from who she was to the seizure to part of the collective, and I think that's interesting to pay attention to her face throughout all of that. But more interestingly is how the village completely changes. Like the second the switch has happened, all the ceremony stops, all the singing stops, all the people just grab whatever they were using and they all just leave. And the final little detail is that as the girl walks off, earlier in the open, she was holding and petting this baby goat, and it was kind of this sweet, kind of, innocent thing, but it was kind of warm and whatever. And at the end of this sequence, she just walks off as part of the collective, and the baby goat kind of chases after her, and she doesn't turn back to look at it. It's kind of like the humanity's gone. And, all the ceremony was all a show for her. It was just for her, because the collective don't care about ceremony. The collective don't care about the culture, at least in the sense of actually practicing it. They won't do it other than just, they remember it. They understand the history of Earth cultures and all that, but they don't really have a reason to do it on their own. So once she's part of the collective, there's no reason to have any pomp and circumstance. There's no reason to make it seem like the greatest thing ever. Now, maybe she does feel happy. Maybe every time they've said, oh, you'll feel happy when you're part of the collective, maybe that is still true. Right? That's not necessarily false. I mean, she is smiling at the end, but as an outside observer, it still feels cold. It still feels just devoid of personality as soon as that switch happens, and it's like, oh, something's been lost here, even if they can't see why it's been lost. And maybe that's kind of like a bit of a metaphor for when, cultures are lost to time because there's no one around to actually continue them, because, they've been mixed up into other cultures, or because, there's been some more severe colonialism, if not murder, and things like that. I don't know if it's necessarily trying to branch out into that type of thing, but certainly it feels like something's lost at the end of this open. But then the rest of the episode, of course, is all about Carl and Minosus and everything that's going on there, and of course Zosha's there as well. And she's expecting him, and it's very interesting to me and very, very intentional. The start of the episode, when Zosha's like, "Hey, he's on his way. He'll be here in 2 hours." And we're all going to have to kind of get away because he hates us, blah, 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 blah. You could leave too if you want. And then Carol says, no, he's came all the way from Paraguay. I owe it to him to be here. That mirrors almost exactly what was said about Carol going to Vegas just a few episodes ago. She's now on the other side of this. And while she's not throwing wild gambling parties and playing out a whole charade in that way, it still kind of points out that while it might not seem as extravagant and as showy as what we were seeing in Vegas, she is still living out a charade. Like, Zosha's still just playing house with her because that's what makes her happy. It's still an act. It's still a performance for the sake of her happiness. It's a little reminder that it's not quite real, but it also shows where Carol is as a character at this point, where she's kind of deep in it in that way. And then everything between her and Minos is just hilarious, frankly. Like, obviously, there is that element of, like, hey, I don't want you coming in my house with a machete. And that's, fine. And he understands that well enough. So he's like, okay, right. And there's a lot of the phone translator. But immediately, he doesn't like the idea of a phone being around because they can listen from that. He's very paranoid. So he takes her phone and shoves it down the grate. And she's like, oh, you know what? F you. We're done. Go away. And she goes back in. And he realizes that he has to kind of win her back over, so he gets his machete out of the ambulance and he goes to fish it out. And luckily our phones get a magnet in the back, so it does make it a bit easier once he gets it. But what makes this all funny, though, is that she had the translator app running when he threw it down there. So when he starts mumbling to himself in Spanish and being pissed off, it starts translating for the audience as he's, because he says shut up in Spanish, and then you just hear the computer voice go, shut up. Okay, I don't know. I was getting a good chuckle out of a lot of this. It felt very kind of awkward, but also very realistic in a lot of ways, because, yeah, his social skills aren't very good. He's been holed up by himself for ages, and frankly, Carol's social skills aren't even that good, right? And I say this as an introvert who's also got not the best social skills. This is a meeting between two people who are not very good at interacting with other human beings. And the irony of everything that's been going on in this show is that individuals have went away. But these two, I don't think, were ever that good at it in the first place. But certainly they're very rusty now, given the last 60 days or however long it's been by this point. So, like, all of this made sense to me, that, like, he doesn't really know how to conduct around her, and he kind of, like, does some faux pas immediately where she's kind of thrown off because he just refuses to do certain things. He doesn't want to go in the house because he thinks there's bugs. Although when she says bugs, he gets confused because, the translator just translates it as the word bug, so he thinks she's talking about insects or something like that, and, there's a whole thing there. So, he wants an umbrella so they can't spy on them from drones, so she's like, let's go inside, and he's looking for bugs, and there's a great little character bit here where he does actually eventually find something inside the house. He finds it in the liquor cabinet, and it's a little thing that does look like some kind of bug. There's a sensor on it of some kind. So Carol phones up, very upset, and is like, hey, what the hell is this? Have you been spying on me? And when she describes where she found it, Zosha's like, oh no, that wasn't us. And she explains that this was something that Helen installed back when she was going to have her eggs frozen. So one, it reminds you of the eggs being frozen, so it's reminding you of that because it's going to come up later in this episode, just in case you'd forgotten it. So that's smart writing to remind us of that. But it's this thing where it's like, hey, Helen did this behind her back because she was concerned that she would be drinking when she's supposed to be, clear for donating or getting her eggs frozen or whatever. So I think this kind of hits her, and it's like an awkward little, like, speed bump in the conversation where Carol has to come back in and says, no, it wasn't them, it was my spouse. And that's kind of like, she didn't like me drinking, and she does, and immediately after she says she didn't like me drinking, she then says, no, I really need a drink, which is just kind of like, I don't even know what to call that beyond, it's not even ironic at this point, it's beyond irony. But it's not like going amazingly. He wants to save the world, he wants to, solve all this. The other thing I think he said when they were outside is that they're evil, and if they can't be turned back, then they might as well be killed. Which obviously Carol's like, whoa, they're still human. They're not evil necessarily. Come on now. So there's a bit of a clash here. And so while there's a little bit of, like, maybe there's a threat element to some of this, right? Where is he dangerous to her? That's a question she even asks. And Zosha says, well, we don't think he'd ever harm you. But that, the implication being that he has threatened us a bunch of times, and we do think he would hurt us if he got the chance. or we pushed them too far or whatever. So, right, all this is good stuff. So Carol is like, look, had enough for today. We'll talk more tomorrow. And she takes him to the neighbor's house and says, hey, this place has been stocked. I made sure there was food here. There's clean sheets, so on and so on. And Minosus immediately is like, wait, like, whose was this? Whose house is this? And she's like, oh, I think their name was whatever. And he's like, so this isn't your house to give me. And Carol's like, look, if they ever come back, I will square it with them. And that would be a lovely problem to have. Which is maybe all he needed to hear, to be honest, is that she will make it up to them if they ever return. But yeah, he does kind of end up making this his base of operations. But, you know, when she did freak out at him earlier under the umbrella, she did also say, like, hey, have you even tried talking to them? You know, they can't lie. Did you know that? This was all kind of, again, interesting because of how much it mirrored, like, how she had been earlier in the season with people saying, hey, you could have just asked them this. They cannot lie. They would have just told you. And now she's saying that to Minosus because he's the even more extreme version of her in a lot of ways. So she planks him next door and he looks at the phone and he realizes, he gets an idea, right? And when she wakes up, she's been falling asleep to Golden Girls again. She's been getting a lot of use out of those DVDs. She notices Zosha's car outside, and she immediately gets frantic, jealous, you might say, certainly worried, like, what's going on here? And she storms over to the house and goes inside and sees them sitting there, and she's like, what the hell's happening? And Zosha's like, oh, we've been asking questions. And he's like, yeah, she told me everything. And she's like, okay, you're coming with me right now, right? You're not to see him. We're going. And she takes Zosha back to her place. And he immediately just rings up the phone and says, send another one. Like, he's fact-finding. He's like, okay, you're telling me I've got this resource, right? Which obviously paints a picture of, like, he could have done this ages ago and he just refused. It wasn't until Carol said, they can't lie. You can just ask them things. Now he's using that as a resource. But there's some great stuff here, because when Carol's talking to Zosha, there's a moment, first of all, like, you know, like he's been asking all these questions and it's like, oh, is that dangerous? And first of all, from a character perspective, Carol starts saying, you know, like, you've not to see him, you're mine, you're my chaperone. And when Zosha says, we love him as much as we love you, Carol gets hurt by that. She's like, wait, what do you mean as much as me? That can't be right. And she's, you know, she's clearly about to say we're living together. And then she kind of like pauses and says, you're my chaperone. And it's kind of like a bit of a reality check of like what this is, and that yes, she's like attaching herself to Zosha, but she's not, like, she's them. She's everyone. And the idea that they care about Minosus as much as her kind of almost invalidates how special she thought that relationship was. I don't think it's as simple as saying it's like a jealousy thing per se. I think it's more of a harsh reality of like what them caring about you actually means. It's not a one-to-one caring about each other in the way that it was before with individuals. And I think that's like a good little character moment. But from like a science fiction, like mechanical perspective, I love that in the middle of this conversation, and I love that also that you can see like the car arrive in the background. You can see like the headlights going past the window for the person arriving for Minosus. That's a really nice little detail. But halfway through the scene, Zosha just starts to get on the floor, and Carol's like, what the hell are you doing? And she's like, something's about to happen, don't worry. And she starts having a seizure. And you realize very quickly that this is what was happening at the start of the season when Carol was like, you know, getting really emotional and they couldn't handle it. And it was leading to a lot of deaths. And Carol's like, holy shit, I know what's causing this. And she goes back over to, you know, to the other house and sees that Minosus is triggered this intentionally. He wants to like see what happens, and he's like trying to like learn things. And there's a moment in the middle of the scene where Carol's saying, what are you doing? Do you have any idea how many people you might have just killed? When the guy starts to calm down, Minosus like just yells in his face immediately, which was very funny. A little darkly funny, but very funny nonetheless. And it does the whole thing where the camera stays on him when Carol leaves. And it's like a nice bit of a shock when the shotgun blast goes off against the wall. and Carol's standing there with a shotgun, which is such a cool payoff because we established she had that gun episodes ago. It was a whole thing, but it's been long enough where you weren't really thinking about it too much. So it was like, hey, and I think this is a key point in the episode where I was thinking, you know, I'm kind of on Carol's side here. What he's doing feels a little too destructive. It feels a little psychotic. And maybe he's not quite comprehended how many people are going to die. Although, to be fair, Zosha did point out later on when she's leaving that he did warn them before he did what he did. So that should have mitigated the number of deaths by a considerable margin. Maybe there's some that, you know, they were in positions that would have been too late or not enough time to get to a safe, you know, place to have their little lie down. But certainly I think much less people would have died compared to when Carol had her random outbursts back in the first couple episodes. So yeah, so this is all interesting, and I think for me, like, I was like, okay, I'm kind of on her side. I'm kind of rooting for Carol to weirdly protect them, and it's such a flip from where she was earlier in the season, which is good character progression, even if, you know, in the back of my head, I'm still thinking, you know, last episode, I felt like they were, you know, manipulating her a little bit too much, and I don't really feel like their end goals are necessarily completely good, and I do feel skeptical of them, and I feel skeptical of how they're treating Carol and how they're the sort of, you know, the charm offensive was the phrase of the last episode title, and I think that's a really good word for it. But in this moment, I was still like, you know what, he does seem like the bad guy right this second, and it feels kind of like a big deal that she's willing to fight to protect them. And I was kind of thinking, yes, be a badass, do this, save them, because regardless of what they are, that doesn't necessarily mean they deserve death, right? And if there is ever a hope of bringing everyone back, then having killed many of them isn't going to exactly be a good thing then either. So, right, so you've got that. And when Zosha gets up, she's like, you understand what we're going to have to do, don't you, Carol? And it's quite clear that they're all going to leave the city again. But this time it's because of him, right? They have to stay away from him because he's dangerous, because he might hurt them, so they can't allow them to be close to him. And Carol, you know, sees her off, and she ultimately decides to sort of go with her, and we get like a montage of them together, with, by the way, a couple of more really dodgy green screen moments. And they're both shots where they're like sort of mid shots from like the side, like a side view of them. And the first one, it's like there's like islands or whatever, or mountains in the background. The second one's when they're walking in the snow. And there's some wide shots that look completely fine, but there's these like side sort of medium close-up shots that just look really poorly composited. A lot like that the start of that episode where they were all leaving the city for the first time. They weren't as egregious because the camera wasn't moving in quite the same way, and there wasn't like the CG of everything, but like this looked just dodgy. And it's so weird because so much of the rest of this show looks so expensive. It's just weird to have a couple of really bad green screen shots in the middle of all of it, because the rest of it looks so high quality. It's really strange. But before she goes on her little montage trip, though, we get a funny reveal that Minos was put in the boot of a car, or sorry, the trunk of a car for the Americans, and the shot of him like just being in there with his arms folded and looking at Carol like so pissed off was very funny. And he says kind of the title of the episode more or less, where he's like, do you want to save the world or get the girl? Like he's asked enough about her, right, off camera to Zosha. He's learned enough about her that he knows kind of the predicament that she's in and how she's kind of softened and why she's softened with them. And he's putting that forward. And she chooses to leave. She chooses to go with Zosha, and we get them having spa days and going adventuring and everything else. She buys into the greeting card, like, fantasy of everything. And maybe there's some health in that, but Carol herself says that despite the fact that she knows she's technically supposed to be happy, and she feels all these happy things, she's not good at being happy. And that, you know, and Zosha tries to explain it by talking about the chemicals that make us happy, you know, endorphins and things like that, and you know, dopamine and blah blah blah. And like she's done a little thing, but Carol broaches the subject once again of like her turning, and she doesn't just get to it on her own either. Like Zosha says, "Don't worry, I'm happy you're happy, and it's going to be even better." And that line makes Carol pause, and says, wait, are you talking about me becoming part of the collective? Because I didn't give permission for that. And of course, she catches her holding back information about methods of getting her stem cells, and Carol herself realizes, oh wait, can you get them from my frozen eggs? And she says it's not a guarantee and it takes time, but yeah, in maybe a month to 3 months we should have them. And it's like, wait, so does Carol not have to give consent to be a part of the collective then? Like, they have to get consent to physically take it from her, but they don't have to get consent to turn her, which I guess tracks with everyone else. They didn't get anyone else's consent back in episode 1, so I suppose that makes complete sense that they wouldn't, like, for whatever reason, the one thing that they can refuse or insist upon is anything to do with making people join. Everything else, they need consent. Everything else, they need to ask permission, or they'll be honest about anything else. But if you ask them about stopping the joining or reversing it, that's when they'll refuse to tell you something. And that seems to be the one subject where they've got, like, all their rules are broken in some way. So this is kind of a heartbreaking scene. It's like a reality check for Carol, because she finds out that this is all still bubbling down to they're going to turn her. And she even says, if you really love me, you wouldn't make me do that. And she's like, it's because we love you that we have to do this to you. And once again, it's all coming down to, yes, they quote-unquote love her, but only in so much as that they can turn her into just like one of them. And thus we come crashing back into those central themes of the show of, you know, becoming like what society wants you to be and not being an individual, and how important that is, even when sometimes they can, you know, make it seem not so bad. They can give you the illusion of happiness because you have nice things, you know, like, you know, capitalism sucks, but hey, you've got enough money for a vacation, so go off on your little skiing holiday and have drinks by the fireplace. See, everything's okay. You don't have to worry about all the bad things that are happening because of capitalism. Now, I'm kind of comparing, you know, things that aren't one-to-one there, but that's kind of like what happens here is like, hey, you've been tricked into this married life because this is something you wanted. You've been lonely. You've been getting everything you kind of want, but it's all kind of a means of an end of just making you fall into place for what we want you to become later on. So yeah, this idea of asking her to change, of asking a gay person to change, is something, obviously a subject that comes up a lot. So it makes complete sense thematically that this is the wake-up call, and I love the ending of this episode. You see, Minos has been, like, you know, studying up. He's been trying to, like, figure out ways to use the frequencies. And I never mentioned before, but when he had the other guy of the collective, and he was making him have those seizures, or making them all have those seizures through him, he went out and got his radio and turned to that frequency that he found before, and he was getting some noises from him, and he was even whispering in the guy's ear, hey, I can't remember what the name was, but it was like, hey, Wilson, I know you're in there, you can come back to it. And he was saying it all in English, like he was like going for it, and it didn't work. It wasn't that simple, but he knows there's something to do with this frequency, so he's reading books on frequencies. He's reading books on probably biochemistry, I imagine, probably brainwave books. I don't know what else. Anything possibly that could be related to figuring out a method to solve this. And the poor guy, because his English is still pretty slim, he's having to like read it in English and then like, or look at it in English and then put it into, or look up the English to Spanish dictionary and figure it out from there. Well, Spanish to English, but you know what I mean. Other way around. So yeah, all of that is good sort of stuff. But him hearing the helicopter coming in, I actually thought Carol was going to come out of the box, like the container that the helicopter was carrying. I thought she was going to make a grand entrance and be like, boom. I thought we were going to get, I genuinely thought the final line was going to be let's save the world, in the same way that Walter White once said, let's cook, at the end of a Breaking Bad episode. It was like towards the end of season 1 of Breaking Bad, he'd been trying to like go back to his normal life for a bit, and there's an episode that ends with him saying to Jesse, let's cook. And I kind of thought, oh, this season's going to end with her looking at Minos in the eye and saying, let's save the world, which is obviously a more heroic endeavor than cooking meth. But I thought it was going to, like, you know, spiritually feel like a kind of a similar moment, but maybe a much more healthier version of it. She does say, we're going to save the world, but she says it in a more sort of cynical, you win, let's save the world. Like, she's not thrilled about this. She kind of wishes she could live in the fantasy, but they won't let her live in the fantasy because the clock is ticking down to when they're going to force her to become like them. But the reason why I love this ending, because I never saw this coming, I thought this was a great payoff to an earlier conversation that was very funny at the time, where she's walking into her place and Minos says, you know, what's in the box? And Carol, without, I think, even turning to look at him, just says, atom bomb. And that's the final thing we end the season on, is that she got the atom bomb. She asked for one and she got it. I don't know if this is like if you come to change me, I'm going to set it off. Kind of, is this a deterrent? Maybe, I don't know. Minos definitely wasn't expecting that answer, I can tell you that. But I was laughing hysterically when she said atom bomb. I legitimately thought it was a great payoff to that earlier conversation, and it felt like a big swing here at the very end of the episode. And there's lots of little details I liked here. This isn't even like a storytelling thing. I love that when she got out of the helicopter, you could see Rhea Seehorn like already holding the bottom of her t-shirt because she knew that the wind from the propellers was going to, like, you know, it would be blown up otherwise, which is completely fine. Like, it makes sense that the character would also try and stop that from happening, but she's like already like got it grasped like way in advance, and it kind of felt like, oh, they did a take maybe, and not that they necessarily had a helicopter really there in front of her. I'm sure they just had something simulating the wind, but I assume they maybe did a take first where she wasn't expecting it and all of a sudden like her clothes were all like woo, so it felt like she was just kind of like, you know, it felt like she thought about it a bit too much, but anyway, I'm not even complaining about it. It was just a funny little detail. So no, I think this episode is hilarious. Like, there's a moment where Minos just kind of shrugs at her when she gets mad, and it just kind of felt like, yeah, of course I'm saving the world. Like, I'm lovable Minos. I'm here to save the world. why are we questioning me? Or even the bit where, again, showing how kind of poor their social skills are, and, you know, communicating with other individuals, when he snaps his fingers at her when he wants the phone translator back on, and he just sort of goes like that, phone, and she just sort of stands there like, excuse me, and then she's like, I don't speak snap, none of this. Yeah, like, I really liked that moment. I thought that was really good because it felt very real. It felt like a very kind of real, you know, it's one thing to like play up the bigger tension of it, right? This idea that we're two of the only people left on the planet. We can technically hurt each other. Maybe you don't trust me. Those are big, obvious things to play into, and they should play into them. But I like that this is a really small, simple one where he just doesn't know how to talk to someone, and he just acts like a bit of a dick and kind of like he's in charge, and he's a, you know. So when she like stands her ground and says, "No, I don't respond to being snapped at," he kind of like has to like come over and like sort of bite, you know, swallow his, not even swallow his pride. He's a little sarcastic when he says it, but like the way he sort of says, "Can I have phone, please?" It was funny. It was like a funny little thing where, if this show is so much about how we communicate with each other, this felt like a very, very kind of, because hey, I mean, I don't think I've ever snapped fingers at anyone because I know that's rude, but like, I've definitely fallen into traps where someone doesn't like the way I phrase something because they see it as rude, even if it wasn't intentioned that way. You encounter these things. Now, don't get me wrong, him snapping his fingers is rude no matter what context you're in. But it shows just how much he's been on his own, how he's been holed up, how he's taking this super seriously, and he doesn't want to make with niceties. I don't know, it's fun. And I also like it as kind of a payoff to him, like, practicing his, you know, my name is Minos, I'm here to save the world, you know, bit for the whole like journey, only to get here and immediately it's like just devolved into don't snap your fingers at me, you prick. Like, I don't know, there's something very human about it, and that actually is part of what's making it so funny, is that it feels genuine, but none of it undercuts the actual thing that's going on and the progression that we're kind of building to. So it feels like we're getting to season 2, which is already greenlit, with them having this shared goal, right? And maybe I'm sure they'll maybe iron some things out. It wouldn't surprise me if there's a bit of a time jump. Although we do have that month to 3 months kind of window, so maybe it won't be that much of a time jump. But I wouldn't be surprised if his English is like 50% better, just because hey, it's been a week. He's been learning a lot in a week talking to Carol. He's you know, just to make it easier on us. But who knows? Maybe not. Maybe they'll stick to their guns of like him only knowing a few key sentences and having to rely on a translator to make it work. But no, all good, all good. Because you know the show is all about communication. Like the Hive are all just effectively all in communication with each other all the time, but it's forcing Carol to kind of, you know, realize how she lives in the world that's now separated from her, and how she was kind of already doing that, and now she's forced to actually be in a one-on-one scenario with another individual and form a partnership. Not a romantic partnership. There's no risk of that because she's gay, but like, I mean, well, I think she is. I mean, maybe she's bisexual, but I don't think so. There's no risk of that, and I don't think it's remotely going in that direction. It's more just about like the actual working together for the betterment of everything, and can they coexist? Can they get along? Can they actually agree on some stuff? Can they compromise with each other? And I feel like there's already signs that they are compromising in this episode. Benossos does realize he effed up early on and tries to fix it, so there is some stuff going on there. But yeah. Also, laughed a lot after the seizure bit where she got a phone call. I mean, they didn't even see the other woman, but the mother of the daughter, and she's just like, F off. It wasn't me. That also got a chuckle out of me. This is a very funny show. And to be fair, Vince Gilligan shows have been funny. Like Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul were often funny. But this episode in particular, Pluribus, was really funny. But it was never funny because we were doing a stupid joke. It was always funny in ways that felt natural and how the characters were progressing through the story. And the cinematography, barring a couple of bad green screen shots, as previously mentioned, looked pretty stunning. When the ambulance was coming up to the cul-de-sac that she lives on, there was some great shots in there at that point. There's a great moment where he looks over at the grave as he's walking into the house, and he sees that. It's like, occasionally there's the dodgy green screen shot, and I say occasionally, there was a couple in this one, and there was that one big one at the start of that like middle episode, and that's kind of been it for the most part from what I can remember. But generally speaking, the show looks great, and everything with the helicopter coming in at the end looked very good. So I have no complaints on that front, certainly. But anyway, that's my thoughts on Pluribus, and this video is going out on Christmas Day, so Merry Christmas, everyone. Hopefully you've enjoyed the season as much as I have, and there's obviously a lot more to talk about. I think with Pluribus, it's such a rich show with its themes to discuss and its character work, and I think that it's got me heavily invested in the journey of these two characters. And it's exciting to see that Season 2 is going to feel instantly different, because Season 2 we're starting off with these two together, where they're going to be working together and probably arguing and fighting and have a common goal. And how are they going to function when the collective won't come near him? Can she still go and speak to them? And if so, you know, like if they have a plan that involves needing a member of the collective, do they try and trick one into like coming back with them, and so on and so on? Like, there's so many possibilities and options and problems to solve with the direction of this. So, yeah. Very happy with it. Very happy with it. That is Pluribus season finale. Let me know what you thought of this one in the comments. Like, subscribe, all that stuff. Helps out a bunch if you do. You can, of course, support all the content via Patreon or via YouTube membership. Please do. Helps keep everything coming. Thanks to everyone who already does. But that is me. So thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?